With just a few more weeks in this series that we're calling Renewing, this series again where we seek to encounter this powerful healing work of Jesus Christ in our lives. We've discovered a lot of challenges along the way. Like one of the challenges is healing doesn't mean fixing. So like to be healed by God doesn't mean he's going to fix all your problems. Okay, we've talked about how a challenge is just simply acknowledging that we're wounded, because some of us are like, well, I've never been through anything seriously traumatic in my life. But because of original sin, because we're all human beings, all of us are wounded at a deep level, okay? We've talked about the challenge of needing to forgive others. We've talked about a need for a healing that goes to the roots, not just the leaves, that whole business. We've talked last week about needing to persevere even when things get difficult. Great. One other challenge, though, for today, it's the challenge it's just the challenge of the discomfort of what some people would call navel gazing. They're just like, Father, okay, sure, this is good and stuff, but isn't being a Christian and a Catholic about serving and helping others? Like, why are we focused so much on ourselves? Like, why are we just staring at ourselves this whole time? Like, it seems like something's off there. And again, I get it. It's uncomfortable taking a long, hard look at yourself. I did this one hard look at myself. It lasted 6 years. It was called seminary. And every day I had people pointing out to me some more things that I could look at myself about and be like, hey, Michael, have you ever thought about this? And I'm just like, thanks, I'll look at that too. Right? So again, I had plenty of time, lots of time to look at myself. So I understand how uncomfortable it can be. But then think, the gospel just a couple of weeks ago, Jesus says, why are we so worried about the splinter in our brother's eye and not so worried about that log that's coming out of our own eye? Take the log out of your eye first. So Jesus seems to endorse this idea of, well, yeah, maybe we need to kind of focus on ourselves first a little bit at times. Maybe there is a little bit more going on within us than we're giving ourselves credit for. But again, I know it can be uncomfortable. The second thing, though, again, aside from it not being fun, the second thing, it's easy to have that feeling of, it's very similar, it's like, this seems very self-centered, a little narcissistic to just be thinking about myself. It seems too much focused on me. But then think, I've been a priest for 7 years, and I've learned one thing. You ready? I learned this. Husbands have all the problems and wives have none of them. Did you know that? I've discovered this. Wives have zero issues, only their husbands. It's incredible. So again, think, if your husband has some issues and is affecting your marriage and it's affecting the family, would it be helpful for him to focus on himself and address those things? Yes, that would actually help the marriage and help the family if he were to be so selfish and address some of his issues. Same thing for me. Was it selfish of me to go to seminary for 6 years to prepare to become a priest? Shouldn't I have just shown up here and gotten to work? Again, no. So we understand this. But again, your instinct is right. Your instinct is right. Even though it's uncomfortable, even though, it can seem a little strange your instinct is right. Why? Because this work is a means to an end. It is a means to an end. Ultimately, this work of healing, of addressing our wounds, of addressing our problems, this work of taking time to intentionally invite Jesus to work powerfully within our hearts, all of it, it is a preparation. It's a means to an end. As Jesus would say, it's a cultivation of the soil. It's a fertilization. Why? So that we can bear fruit. So you're right. You're right. As Jesus was saying in the gospel today, though, if we're not bearing fruit, if there's not fruit being born in our lives from our faith, something's wrong. Again, we can't just be a bump on the log and say, well, I go to church and I don't kill anybody, so I'm good. No, if we're not bearing fruit, then something's off. There's still work that needs to be done. We're exhausting the soil. We should just be cut down. But thanks be to God, in his mercy, Jesus, the gardener, in this parable Jesus tells, the gardener says, whoa, give me just a second. Give me some time. Let me do some work on them. Right, let me cultivate the soil. Let me fertilize the ground. Maybe they will still bear fruit. Right, so Jesus, in his mercy, he gives us time for this. He encourages us to take the time for this. So again, our goal in this series is not to become neurotic about our problems or invent problems we don't have, or just become so scrupulous and centered on ourselves that no. The goal in this time of focusing on ourselves, of seeking God's healing, it's that means to an end so that we can bear fruit, good fruit one day. But as we've already talked, if the tree's bad, if the roots are bad, it's never going to produce good fruit. And so we can't skip the step. We can't skip that step of needing to first, address what's wrong within me. What's going on within me that I need to ask God to help me with, to help heal and help to address. The health of the tree has to come first. One place I learned this lesson, it was actually the lesson of health and the importance of health. It actually came from the world of business. In the world of business, there's this big buzzword right now. It's called organizational health. It's the big thing people love to talk about. But again, if it's true, anything that's true, it ultimately comes from God, who is truth himself. So if it's true, it's good. And so we can still apply it to our lives, even if it's from business. One of the guys that loves to talk about this is a guy by the name of Simon Sinek. You may have heard of him. He's a big business guru. He loves talking about this stuff. But he swears by two principles for this organizational health, the thing that we need in businesses for health. But again, it applies to us. The first principle that he swears by is called the principle of starting with why. You have to know why. Your children learned this at 2 years old, and they started asking you, why? And you kept telling them, just do it, right? Eat your peas, eat your broccoli, just do it, kid. But they started asking, why? Why would I do this? People need to know why. People don't latch onto what, people latch onto why. So think, like, if you're on an airplane and somebody sits down next to you that really wants to talk to you, you know, my worst nightmare. And they're just like, all right, hey, you'll introduce yourselves. You'll say, hey, you know, what's your name? What's my, okay, great to meet you. Please don't talk to me. But then they'll say, what's always going to be their first question? What do you do? Always the first question, what do you do? And then you'll say, I don't know, you'll be like, oh, I'm a chiropractor. And they'll go, cool. Because like aside from 5% of people, nobody really cares, or nobody really wants to talk to the chiropractor about being a chiropractor. They're just like, cool. But then even if you're very kind and you return the favor and you're like, hey, well, what do you do? They're going to go, I'm in marketing. And you're going to go, cool. And that conversation is dead before it starts. You're just like, because nobody cares. We care, we'll fake interest, but we don't really care. But again, same situation. Think if you switch it up on them. They say, hey, what do you do? If you tell them why, if you say, I love every single day of my job, right? I love being able to give people the ability to live a more inspired and fulfilled life. They're going to go, whoa, what, how? And then you'll say, believe it or not, I'm a chiropractor. And they're going to go, what? And then all of a sudden, you'll be able to have a beautiful conversation, not about what you do, but about why. Okay, so people latch on to why. It's just, again, it's just a truth of how we're built. Like, we latch onto a why. So that's, again, that first principle. Start with why. Why is very important. The second principle Simon swears by is this principle called the law of diffusion of innovation. I know it sounds nerdy. We've all heard of a bell curve, right? Society always kind of works itself out over a bell curve. So, for example, we all know this from growing up. There were like those super dweeby nerds in class. There's two of them. But then there's like two really dumb kids in class. But then the rest of us were just kind of like in that meaty middle. We're just like, I'm a normal kid. I do my schoolwork and I make it through. It's okay. We get that. Or like right now, today, like a couple of you are just like, man, everything Father Michael says is so awesome. And a couple of you are like, I wish he would shut up. But then most of you in the middle are like, I don't know, maybe he'll have a point today. Maybe we'll get something out of this, right? The meaty middle. That's how life works. Okay, so the law of diffusion of innovation, it's the same bell curve, but it's about innovation and new things coming along. So when something new happens, an innovation happens, right, you have the very tiny small percent of that bell curve, which is the innovator. These are the people that come up with new ideas. And even though you think you have cool new ideas, you don't. Right? This is like 1% of the population. This is like the Steve Jobs of the world. Henry Ford, people that come up with something so new, it changes things. So we can take Steve Jobs, he makes an iPhone. Sweet. That next chunk of the bell curve, which is a small chunk, it's only like 12 or 13%, those were the people that bought the first iPhones. Okay, they're called the early adopters. That's their name, the early adopters. And everyone, when people started buying iPhones, everyone's just like, that's crazy. That's way too expensive. You're never gonna, the screen's gonna break, so you won't be able to text. Just get your QWERTY, right? You need the buttons that you can push. Right? This iPhone's gonna fail. It's what a waste of money. But some people were like, no, we're going for it. And they took a risk. They were a little nutty, but they went for it. They invested in it. And that's an early adopter. And then what happened? iPhone example. Then you got the early majority and the later majority. That's that meaty middle. All of a sudden, everyone started getting an iPhone. They're like, those kids are cool. And everyone started adopting this new iPhone thing. That's us, the majority of us. We're just like, okay, I guess we'll go for it. And then that last chunk of people, as the bell curve thins out again, they're called the laggards. These are the people that swore their entire life, I'm never getting an iPhone. So stupid. This is your grandma, and you eventually bought her one, and you're like, no, grandma, you're having an iPhone because we need to know where you're at. We need to be able to call you. We need to be able to text you. I know you hate it, but you have to have it. And they still hate it to this day, but begrudgingly they have it. Okay? This is the law of diffusion of innovation. The innovator who came up with the idea, but then we want to focus on that early adopters, the early people that came on. So why did I bring this up? Again, I bring it up because, like I said, all truth ultimately comes from God. This is the way that God created the world. This is how just reality and humanity works itself out. This is why science can observe creation and say, oh yeah, this is how things work. It's because there's an order, there's a design to life. Okay, so why? And there's a law of diffusion and innovation. So when we think about this scene in our first reading, okay, so God appears to Moses in the burning bush. Very famous scene. But what's it all about? What's really going on? We know the story. Moses grew up in the house of Pharaoh. Then there was a big falling out, and then he moved to Midian. But then he just settled down, got himself a wife, started having kids. He's just like, I'm just gonna chill. We'll just live the nice, quiet life. That's us. Right? We're just like, I'm just gonna live my life. Nothing crazy. One day, though, when he was taking care of the sheep, what happens? Famously, he sees miraculously this burning bush that's on fire, but not consumed. It's not burning up. And so he goes to check it out. And then notice what happens. God speaks, and he introduces himself. He's like, hey, I'm God, father of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You know me. But then what does God lead off with? What does God start with? Why? Why am I here, Moses? Why? Why did I come down? What's going on here? Why am I here? And he tells Moses very clearly, right, I've witnessed the affliction of my people. I've heard their cry. I know well what they're suffering. Therefore, why? I have come down to rescue them, to lead them into a new land, this land filled with milk and honey. God leads with why he's there. He leads with his why. Okay, great. So then, who's Moses? Well, God very quickly tells Moses, and guess how this is going to happen? You. Welcome. Right. So he tells Moses, now you go. I've told you why, and now what you're going to do is you're going to go to Pharaoh. You're going to lead these people out. And Moses gives all the excuses why he can't do it, why he shouldn't do it. Sure, great. But then he eventually, again, he's this early adopter. God's the innovator. He came up with the idea. But then Moses is the early adopter. Moses is a little crazy. He's like, well, I'm going to go for it. Moses takes a risk. He's a little nutty, but he goes for it. When no one else is doing it, he does. He takes on that risk and he goes for it. And what happens? You all know the end of the story, right? What happens? They get rescued. Right? They are saved. The people are let out. Again, that's that majority. They all get let out eventually. But even the laggard Pharaoh eventually says, yeah, just get out of here. This is just how things work. Someone, though, has to be a little nutty, a little crazy, take a risk there at the beginning. That's how things are going to happen. Okay, so what I'm getting at for us, the big point for today is this. The challenge for us is that we have to be that crazy person, so to speak. We have to be a little nutty, and we have to take the risk. I've mentioned before many times, we're living in this time where we can't just be casually Christian. We can't just be casually Catholic anymore. It doesn't work. It falls apart. I grew up, I know you think I'm young, but I'm old. I grew up in the beautiful 90s. The 90s were the bestest time in the entire world. Right? Life was perfect. Nothing was wrong in the 90s. It was amazing. Everyone was Christian. Everyone was Catholic. Everyone was a good person. It was great. I grew up in that time where you just kind of went with the flow and things were good. But what we've discovered, especially now in the 2000s, the worst, 90s were the best. In the 2000s, we've discovered that's all gone. It's all gone. Right? No one is just casually Catholic anymore. People that were casually Catholic, they left. They're out of here. It takes a very intentional decision to continue to live our faith. Very, very intentional decision. And this brings about then, like, it's the why of the series of renewal, it's the why of the parish in general. But we need to know the why. The why of it all is it's the same as Exodus. It's the same as God's always been doing. God's heard our suffering, he's heard our cry, and he knows the people still need rescued. The rescue for us looks a little bit different. Like, none of us are enslaved in Egypt. I don't know if you knew that, but we fall into our own Egypts of the day. There's plenty of things we need rescued from. Again, it does not take more than 3 minutes of looking at the neighborhood, at looking at the town, at looking at the nation, at looking at the world to recognize, yeah, something's off. And we've also began to recognize, even though I'm sure everyone had a beautiful spring break, we've started to recognize, man, vacation doesn't fix it. A better job doesn't fix it. All this stuff doesn't fix it. We begin to recognize, no, the only thing that will fix it, that will address it, is Christ himself. That's the why. That's why God does this. But we're in this new time, this innovative time. It's a very different, again, it's not the 90s no more. No, we're in this new time where it takes a newness, and God's already begun the new work. But now we have to be those early adopters. We have to be the ones to embrace this newness that God is beginning to work in our time. And so, yeah, it means we have to be a little bit crazy. We have to take a risk. We can't just casually be a Catholic. That's what I mean. We can't just casually do it anymore. We're no longer the laggards. We're no longer this late majority where it's just like, everyone's doing it, I'll do it too. No, it's going to take a very intentional effort to live this out. But where does it begin? God always begins the work within us. And that's that work of healing, of salvation. Right? If we don't allow God to work first within us, we don't need to go yell at other people that aren't on board with this. We need to allow God to work within us first. And then we have to begin to live it out in very intentional ways. In Mass on Sundays, praying every day, going to confession regularly. I know it's Lent, so we're all thinking about almsgiving and fasting, but like Jesus says, you can do those all the time. We can always give alms to people in need. We can always say, I need to fast from X, Y, and Z. I've talked before about reclaiming Sunday, like how do we live our Sunday? I could go on and on and on. But are we, those early adopters, are we kind of crazy and living our faith in very real, very intentional ways? Because remember, this work of healing, this time that the Lord gives to us, it's not just for us to feel better about ourselves. That would be very narcissistic of us. It's about us taking the time to, work within ourselves, allow the Lord to work within us so that we can bear fruit. Like those early adopters, the fruit comes after those first people take it on. But we have to be those ones to do that first. Right? You're at church today. You're the ones that are saying, there's something here for me. We have to be the ones to take that on. And like Moses, right, God has created you. He's created me. He's created each and every single one of us for a purpose, with a mission. There's something he wants us to do. And I'll close with this. St. John Henry Newman, he wrote this beautiful prayer. I'll put it on the back of your handout today. I'm not going to read you the thing. You know how to read and pray. But there's this beautiful prayer John Henry Newman gives to us that speaks just to this. That God has created each and every single one of us, not just to be a bump on the log and be like, well, one day I'll be dead and I can go to heaven. No, there's some mission, some work, some fruit that God wants each and every single one of us to bear. But we have to allow him to do that, to work that within us. I'll just read this first part of the prayer from John Henry Newman. God has created me to do him some definite service. He's committed some work to me, which he's not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I'm a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. And it goes on, you can read that. But this is the point. God has told us the why. We know the why of what's going on here. But now's the question of, will we be the early adopter and begin to take that on? To live out our faith in new and intentional ways, to allow the Lord to do his work of healing within us. Why? So that we can carry out the mission that he's entrusted us, bear the fruit that he's destined us to bear.